All right, I'm going to be covering your Section 9 study group today. We're going to be talking about Jsons and APIs. Just to let you guys know, I like to be interrupted while I'm lecturing if you have any questions. So at any time, if there's anything that doesn't make sense, or if I'm saying something that is completely foreign, feel free to come off mute and interrupt me. There's no shame in that. Cool. So just to get started, Jsons and APIs, both very important things. JSON is a file format, and APIs is something that you're going to use to get data. And why they're related is because when you use an API, often it's going to come in the format of a JSON. Cool. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about. The way I actually create these notebooks is I Frankenstein together a bunch of important things from Learn and then throw in a little bit of extra stuff. So if you've gone through Section 9, some of this might look familiar. But to get started, a JSON schema looks like this. A JSON looks like this. And this is the schema. And schema is basically a map of what it's supposed to look like. Can anyone tell me what Python data type this looks like?
Dictionary.
Perfect. Yeah, this is a dictionary. JSONs work exactly the same way as Python dictionaries do. So as you can see, you have keys and values. Very often, a little bit annoying to deal with, but JSONs are very, very nested dictionaries. So you're going to see later as we play around with some of these JSON files, we're going to see a lot of nesting dictionaries. So to get more practice with that, I think Section 3, towards the end of Section 3, there are some good labs to just practice working with nested dictionaries. But cool. So as I mentioned, JSON is a file format. And here I says, yep, it's a dictionary and has a key name response. And this dictionary has two keys, docs and meta. I think there's actually a typo. If you see this in the lab, there is a typo where I think they call it data instead of docs or something. Yeah, I think there's a typo somewhere in the lab. So just know that that is a thing. But anyways, nested dictionaries, get used to it. So all right. So in this case,
Hi, sorry. Yeah. Where can I see on the map where it says where the key response?
Ooh, yeah. So sorry, I should have gone more clearly. But here we have the first key here is response, and everything that is nested under here. This is all of this is the value of response. This is another nested dictionary that has two keys, docs and meta. And we're going to explore this a little bit as well. So when you're loading in a JSON file, so sometimes you don't have to use an API to get JSON. Sometimes websites, if they're really nice, they actually give you downloadable JSON files. I think Yelp sometimes does that. Yelp actually releases a set data set every year that's in a JSON file format. So rather than using their API where you can get specific restaurants and specific businesses, Yelp also provides downloadable JSON. They provide their data in a JSON, but it's only a specific subset of all their businesses, and that comes in a JSON file. So sometimes you might need to load up JSON files. So here, what you do, you always import JSON if you want to work with a JSON file. Let's take a look at this file. If you looked at that zip file that I sent out to your Slack channel, this is what's inside. I have some images that I'm using in a notebook. README, less important. But over here, I have this JSON file. I'm going to click it and let's see. So here, it's a lot right now, but you'll see that it's also kind of a nested dictionary. And this is a response from the New York Times. So this is something that we actually got from the API, but we're going to first look at it just as a JSON. So how you load up a JSON file, you use this json.load function. Very, very pretty convenient. You have this open function, which is a Python built-in function. You feed in the file name and also R. So R stands for read. If you're writing a JSON file, which I'll show you guys later, it'll be a W for write. But in this case, we're reading the file. You need to create this open object and then load it up. For some reason, you have to do it in 2 steps. Hard to explain why, but just know that this is what we have to do. So we've loaded up our data and we've saved it to the variable data. And let's take a look at what it is. So here we printed the type of data, which is a dictionary. And we'll take a look at its first level keys, which is status, copyright, and response. So let's see. In this schema that was showed, I basically took a look at what this JSON response was. So that response is literally just this third key. So that that schema that in that photo that was shown is just everything that is nested under this response key. So status and copyright we don't really have to worry about yet. All right, so let's see. Looking at the schema, you might be interested in retrieving specific data such as like articles headlines. So usually when I get like a huge nested dictionary, I actually spend a lot of time like exploring the data. So something I would do is literally take a look at, so I have data.keys and I kind of like inferred that most things are going to be under response. So what I would do first is literally just explore, just keep testing random things in your data. So I would go data response and see, okay, all right, I've got like some docs here. This looks like it starts as a dictionary as well. So let's see what the keys are. So I have docs and I have meta. If I want, let's take a look at what meta is. Meta seems to be like that metadata, I guess. But it seems that most of the information is under docs. So once I've nested into docs, you can see that, all right, it seems to be a list now. So with a list, several things I like to do is take a look at, all right, how long is this list? Take a look at the length. All right, we have 9 docs here. And then other than look at the length, something I like to do is take a look at the first thing. So the first thing you see, like, all right, we have this web URL of an article, snippet, abstract, source, headline, and all this information. And so you can see it's another dictionary. So it's basically dictionary list of 9 dictionaries. So through that process, you're gonna have way bigger JSONs than this, unfortunately, where you're just gonna have to like explore and just get used to working with this data. And so this is the same as what I've got down here. Let's take a look at the keys in this dictionary. So this seems like possibly useful information. I have the URL, I have like the headline, type of document, keywords, the date it was published, an article ID, things like that. So let's assign it to a variable. Let's assign all the docs to a variable. And docs, if we remember, is that, I think is that list of 9 items. Yep, so it's that list of 9 items. And let's just take a look and see if we can get all the headlines. So we've assigned this to docs. And so now docs is a list of 9 items. And you want to get a headline from each, because each thing in docs is a dictionary. We can see the headline for each one by pulling out headline. So it's really important. I know it seems like a lot right now, but it's really important to get used to working with these crazy nestings. So here it looks like headline is another dictionary. Great. But you can sort of see that each of them start with a main, where we have like, okay, Higgins spent 22, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so I think it seems like the main headline, like the actual thing that appears, is under main. So therefore, we can edit our for loop to print, instead of just doc headline, which is a dictionary, we can print doc headline main. And there we have each headline. So this is just really a practice of getting used to working with nested dictionaries. A JSON file format might sound like a completely different thing, but it's really just a dictionary. And the only different thing is you're gonna have to learn how to read JSON files and write JSON files. Also something that's gonna be useful, because we've talked about pandas, I think you guys talked about pandas last week or beginning of this week. You wanna transform JSON, you can transform JSONs into data frames, which is awesome. So in this case, we're gonna try and transform each of the docs into a row in a data frame. And pandas is actually pretty good. It can take in dictionary formats and turn them straight away into data frames. So we import that. Straight away, we see this data frame where you have that first level dictionary for each doc. We have like the headline, and in headline is still that dictionary. We can see that there's more nested data, which is a little irritating to work with, but it's a necessary evil. We have the keywords that seems to be in a list, things like that. And this would all be stuff that you're going to clean. So one useful thing, and let's just take a look at this first thing. If we look into headline was what we were just looking at, is another dictionary. And what we can do with that is we can actually break it out. So I wrote this function, not the best function, I'll tell you right now, but you can just write your own functions to like break out these nested dictionaries that are in columns. So basically when you have something like this is not as helpful. What you want to do is break it out and either like keep just the main, like the main headline, or basically you can make new columns for each of that. So what this function is doing is what we're going to do here is we're going to make a new column for every nested key. So here we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys. What we're going to do is we're actually going to make 7 new columns in this data frame and fill them up with this information. That may or may not be something that you want to do. Sometimes you want to extract like specific keys. That's an easy edit. Anyways, let's take a look at the keys, assign them to keys. What I'm doing is I'm creating new columns. And I'm basically formatting the new column just to make sure that no column names clash. I'm doing like headline underscore main or headline underscore kicker because I'm looping through the keys. And then I'm using a map function to create these new columns. So I'll run this here, and now we can see that we have all of the headline columns. So for here, we have the headline main, headline kicker. These are all the nested keys, and this was all the information that was in there. So if I'd done more inspecting, I would have found out that most of these turned out to be none, and this was unnecessary. But you know, at least I have this function here. I can always edit it to just keep the main. Any questions at this point? This is part of the data cleaning process. But yeah, this is part of the data cleaning process that you're gonna have to like play around with like your Python skills and figure out how to make the data work best for you. Cool. So because JSONs are so nested, we have to do this breaking out to just get the information that we want in their own columns. And finally, you can output to JSON, very similar to the format that I had earlier on with reading a JSON file. We are opening the JSON file. We're opening a new JSON file called output.json, W for write, and then we're dumping the data. So as you can see, this would be like usually if you make some edits to your JSON and you just want to keep a clean version of your JSON, you would save it here. But you see, I called it output.json, and if I look at my homepage here, I have output.json now, and this is a brand new file that I made. You can see like seconds ago. Cool. Any questions before we move on to APIs? All right. So APIs stand for, oh yeah, question.
Sorry, when it said, can you go back to that again? The notebook.
Mm-hmm.
No, the Jupyter notebook.
Oh, here.
Yeah. So when it says with, what does that mean?
It's just a way to use the open, because if you see, let's see here, I assigned this to F and I just loaded F. It's kind of doing the same thing but in a different syntax. And here I'm using this as F. So it's really just doing the same thing as F equals to open and then doing that. So it's just a different syntax of.
Do both syntaxes if you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. All right. So APIs stand for Application Programming Interfaces. They are very, very important for our internet, and APIs are what allows everything on the internet to play nicely with each other and work together. So if you think about, let's see, if you have like Google Maps actually, I have no idea how Google Maps really works, but I imagine how it would work is they have to interact with a lot of different services, because not everything is going to live on the app itself. they probably have an API to like, get all their location data, like get all like the points of interest on your map. That could be a database that exists somewhere, and they're using an API to like get that information. Maybe they're using another API to get like, places. No, I just said places of interest. To get like your location data from your phone. That could also be like another API interaction. Is basically apps interacting with other apps, and that's what APIs are for. So the main parts of an API, and for us, we'll mainly be using an API to get data. So what is an API made out of? Main things, access permissions, because you can't have anyone access an API. A request, which includes methods and parameters, and we'll talk about this again when we look into some documentation. And a response, basically the data. So you make a request for data and you get a response. All right, so these are our goals. APIs provide a way of letting us interact with third-party software and services. You make requests and get response, and then you also have access permissions. For this study group, we're gonna work with the New York Times API. And New York Times is actually pretty cool. They have many different kinds of APIs. They have a new one too that is like just for COVID data. Let's see, I don't think it's here. Oh, there it is. They have a COVID data for they have an API to get their COVID data, which is very interesting. But for this purpose, we're gonna look at movie reviews API because I think that one's a fun one. So this was the schema that they provided on their website. You can see it kind of makes sense if you have a little bit of like context on like movie reviews. So they have, very similar to before, the status, copyright. You can see here we have results, and in results, that's here we have each of our movie reviews. So we have like the title, the MPAA rating, which is like, is it rated G, is it rated PG or like R? What is the critic's pick, headline, when it was published, when the movie came out, all that information is here. So knowing that, this is going to be the kind of JSON that we're going to be dealing with. And I'm just going to open up this documentation because we're going to be referring to it a bunch later. All right. So in order to get data from APIs, we use this library called requests. Python has some built-in ones, but they don't work as well. And I personally have never really used them. But we have requests, and requests is a great library. We use it here for APIs. We also use requests for doing web scraping, which is your next section. Anyways, how you start is import requests. And what you do with requests is you make a GET request to get data. So let's take a look at the API here. What's really helpful, and every API is different. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Every API is different, so it's very, very important that you get used to reading documentation. Very often when you get to a page of like the documentation is like very overwhelming, I always just look for an example call so I can just test it out and see if I can get what I need to get. So let's start with that. I copy and pasted this URL and put that here. So you can sort of see like they're maybe searching for The Godfather, and let's see what that is. All right, we ran that. And for response object has different attributes, and one of them is text, so we can see what the response is telling us. So let's look at response. We get a 401, and response.text, we get this stuff. So this kind of like gives us a clue of why this isn't working. Let's go back to response, because we're going to talk about response codes. So here's a 401. Has anyone heard like 401? Does that sound familiar? I see subtle nods. Yeah, I know sometimes if Google doesn't work, they give you like a 404 like not found error. Good thing that these codes are universal. So let's take a look at the Wikipedia for all these error codes. So bunch of information, and here we go. 401, unauthorized. So basically, it seems that like we don't have access to this API. Upon reading the documentation a little bit more, you'll see here API key equals to your key. So it seems like we're missing some sort of API key. And in reading reading all of this stuff on the website here, if you want to click authorize, you can find out like what you need to do, but basically we'll figure out that we need to make an account on New York Times API and get your own API key. And so I did that. Over here, I made this about a month ago. And here we have our API key. I'm just going to copy this and paste it at the end here. I'm going to do it here. Let's do this so we can see. And at the end, oops. I'm going to paste that key over here. Let's run that. Cool, we got a response 200. So after I added my API key, the response changed. So let's take a look at what 200 is. And 200 is okay, so that's awesome. So when you have the response here, earlier we saw I did response.text, and there are different attributes that we can do. Response.text, not the cleanest one because it gives it to us as like an entire string. What we might end up using more is response.content, or I think response.json is one as well. Oops, and .json is a method. And so response.json just turns all of that response into a dictionary. So we can sort of see that now we've gotten I think the search query was Godfather. And that is something that we, like through reading the documentation, you'll sort of figure out how to create this URL. But yeah, we'll see that, okay, these are all the search results for when you look up Godfather. So it seems like, all right, there's this movie called The Black Godfather. There is Tokyo Godfathers, a bunch of movies there. So that's awesome. So that worked.
When you write JSON.json, that's because you imported JSON?
Yep.
So that's nothing to do with JSON format. It's just it's a library that allows you to do certain things.
So I have .json because I can turn this response object into a JSON format. Wait, what was your question again? I feel like I didn't do that.
When you import JSON, you're importing a library that allows you to work with JSON files?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
All right. A little quick segue before we continue talking about how APIs work. We need to talk about API keys. So if you look on the labs, they have like a much more in-depth spiel. But basically, you should not share your API keys on GitHub. You shouldn't have any of your API keys hard-coded on any of your notebooks because it makes your API, it makes it vulnerable to attack, basically. So if someone had your API key, they could use your API key and maybe get a bunch of like, I don't know, malicious data and ruin your life. I don't know. You just, for safety, you don't want to have your API keys on your notebooks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete mine here so I don't have that there. But in that case, how are you going to get your API key? Wow, I can't do this. How are you going to get your API key to work with the notebook? So on the lab, they actually go through a different method than what I'm going to show you right now. On the lab, I think they go through you making a specific directory on your computer to just store all your passwords for all your APIs. So my method is one that is also used, I think is kind of based on personal preference, but I like to store my API keys with whatever project I'm doing. So instead of having just like one main folder with like every project's passwords and keys, I like to have like a file for each project that has my API keys. So the two main steps is you want to have a file to store your passwords, and then you also want to have a Git Ignore. I'm going to explain, I'm actually going to go through this process right now. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a new Python file to store my passwords. So let's start with text file, and let's change it to a Python file. And I think the standard, I think it's just the standard to just call it a config file. So I'm going to call it config.py. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just create some variables to store my sensitive information. So I think what I called it here, I called one of them ish key and ish secret. So let's do that. So you'll literally just store them as 2 variables in this folder, and then you'll be able to import them later. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back onto my New York Times, copy this key, it's here, paste it as a string. And because they also provided me with a secret, I haven't had to use it yet, but always good to have. And let's paste that here as well. And let's save this file. File saved, close this out. And now I can import yish key and yish secret from config. So if we see over here, if we want to print yish key, my key is actually stored in this variable. So that's just a way of not having your passwords on your notebook. But you might say, but your password is over here. It's just in another file on your repo. So this is where the second step comes in, where we talk about creating a Git Ignore. So has anyone heard of a Git Ignore? Yeah. Has James explained what a Git Ignore does? Kind of. All right, I'll just walk through it again. If you're on like any lab, let's just go to a random Learn lab. I think every Learn lab has a Git Ignore. So let's just see. Let's take a look. Git Ignores. So Git Ignores are basically a list of files that GitHub is going to ignore. So if these files are created on your local machine, so I think some of these may look familiar if you like look into the files that appear in your notebooks, but like IPy notebook checkpoints are automatically created. I sort of think of them as like cookies for like my notebooks. I don't really know what it does, to be honest, but they're just like these random little files that are created to like, I don't know, to like store memory things. I don't know. But DSStore is also a very common one. It's just like an automatically generated file. And the thing is why we want to put these in our Git Ignore is because sometimes on GitHub, imagine if we had all these files in our repository and they get automatically pushed up. One, it can start to look kind of messy, but also this is something that we can use to ignore our config file. So you'll probably do this when you are working on projects with API keys, but what you would do is just create a config file, create a Git Ignore file. On GitHub, if you are creating your repository on GitHub, there's actually an option to like automatically populate a Git Ignore based on what language you code in. But very easily we can do that here. Let me see. Let me reshare my screen so you see my whole screen. All right, so here I have my terminal. Make a new tab. And I am in my JSON API file. It's currently not in Git repositories. I'm going to do that. So when we do an ls, we can see that I have all these files. Let me make this a little bigger. When I do an ls, I have all these files. I have this notebook, the JSON files that I was dealing with, PyCache. That's also something that we probably want to ignore. I don't know if you know this, but there are these things called secret files. Basically, any file name that starts with a period is a secret file. So to see the secret files, you do ls-a. And here we can see there's more. As you can see, we have the IPy notebook checkpoints. That's one of the things that we want to ignore. We have, oh, this is interesting, .git. So .git is actually something that is created when you initialize your Git repository. So if you accidentally make something into a Git repository, you can undo that by just deleting the .git file. That's interesting. Anyways, what we want to do here is create a Git Ignore. And so how I would do that is I do touch, which is the command to create a new file, .git ignore. And so if I do ls-a again, because it's a private file, a secret file, we see our Git Ignore there. And what I would do is I open my Git Ignore. And it just opens in my regular text editor here. I think this is, yeah, text edit. And literally all you have to do is type in the file that you want Git to ignore. So in that case, it's just config.py. Save that, and maybe since I'm here, I'll put in ds store, save that, close it out, and now it'll successfully be ignored. So when you want to git add, commit, and push once you add, commit, and push your work, it's not going to push your config file, which is awesome. So that's really important because you don't want your passwords on GitHub at all. Any questions about that? Cool. All right, let's go back to just my window. So we talked about that. Now you can see that I have my key stored under ishkey. So all right, now we can start making API requests. Usually, so there are different methods of forming an API request. I know the Yelp API has you like creating a dictionary of different parameters. That is another way of doing that. And they're basically taking those parameters and formatting it into this URI. So this URI I sort of think as like a base URL. And whenever you want to change different things, you would edit your URI or like add to your URI, if that makes sense. So here I have the URI, and you can see I ended it right before they need my key. So that is just to make formatting easier. I saved that as a string to the variable URI, and I know that I just need to add my key at the very end, and I can give that whole thing into request.get, turn it into a JSON. So before that, let's do this and take a look at what results is. Cool. So results. All right. And this search, I forgot to mention. I'm just looking at movie reviews from movies released in 2020. So this is something that you would also go back to the documentation and look at. So let's take a look at this. So the way that at least the New York Times one is set up, their documentation, you can look for critics or reviews. So here, I'm just doing, I guess, a review search. This is really just like after a bunch of exploring on the documentation. All right, let's say I want to search for reviews. So you will start your request with this base URI, and then you would build your URI with your parameters. So I wanted to search it by opening date. So you can see here, I'm probably going to add opening date to my URI. And you can see it takes it as a string in this format, year, month, date, start and end date separated by semicolons, and don't set an end date if you want open-ended. So I was just looking at 2020, and it's still 2020, so I don't need to set an end date. If you scroll up and down, I think they give you like an example of how to create this. Yeah, so here, request parameters, you can give it an opening date of 2020 01-01. I think you can execute this. Ooh, wait, and I think you want your API key anyways. Instead of doing this, let's scroll back up because the way you would format it for most APIs is you start with this, let me go back to the URL. You're gonna do a question mark, and then just feed it all your parameters. It's somewhere in the it's actually somewhere in the documentation, but I honestly don't know where to find it again. But you start with the base URL, give it a question mark, and then you just give your query parameters. So in that case, opening date equals 2020-01-01. If I wanted to add more parameters, I would just give it an ampersand and do the same format. And as you can see, API key is actually one of the parameters as well. It's one of the parameters that you need to have for it to work. Yeah, API key. So in that case, it's honestly for me, I like to do a little bit of trial and error to get it to work. But yeah, so that's how you would format your URI. And knowing this is going to help when you want to ping your API multiple times to get multiple groups of results. And we'll talk about that in the next section. But anyways, this works. And I got my bunch of results here. I know that all the stuff that I want, there are 20 results here under the key results. I'm going to take this. Let's take a look at the first one. This is basically a review for one movie, which is awesome. And then I'm gonna just put that into a data frame. I'm gonna put all the results in a data frame. And cool, I think in this case, we don't have much nesting, only for like the URL information and I guess the other multimedia information, but pretty cool. And we can see that this is very, very up to date. This is for a movie that comes out tomorrow, which is awesome. But yeah, so that's how I get 20 results from the New York Times API. What am I gonna do with just 20 movies? Not too much. So when we wanna get multiple results, what we would do is something called pagination and offset. So something we see here is also through looking at the documentation, and you'll start to see very common terms that come up in different APIs documentation. One of them is offset. So let's take a look at offset here. Offset must be a multiple of 20. That differs between API and API, but it sets the starting point of the result set to like 0 or 20. So basically that first result set that we got were movies 0 through 20. And we next want to get 21 through 40, and then like 41 through 60. And defaults to 0, and then yeah, we can keep doing that. And that's how we get more and more reviews. We just have to edit our URL to include this offset parameter. So what we're doing here, let's see. I have just edited this URL a little bit. I hate how it scrolls. But you can see here, I added an ampersand. Why did it keep doing that? Ampersand offset equals to 20. And I like to keep my API at the end just so I can do that plus with my key. But anyways, let's run this exact same thing just with a different URI. And yeah, it looks like these are different movies, which is good because I think this one starts with The Truth, where I think the last one was here, Romans. So awesome. We have different movies, and that's what matters. And so what you would do is you would write a function that would offset your URL every single time until you get the number of movies that you want. This function, not the best again. I just did this in a hurry. But what you see here is I have two different URIs. I don't know why I couldn't figure this particular one out. But what was happening is I couldn't get it to work for offset equals to 0. When I gave it offset equals to 0, it just didn't work. So I just gave it the base URL without any offset. And I set that for the condition for the very first loop. And then here, basically, I would change the offset to n multiplied by 20. So I'm just going to increase the offset by 20 however many times. So this function is a little bit silly, but I wrote it such that it takes an n, where n times 20 is the number of reviews that we want. So if we want 100 reviews, you would do get 20 reviews 5. If that makes sense. You would probably write a better function than me, but yeah. So what I'm doing in here, I'm just looping through 0 to n. So let's say n is 5. I'm going to loop through 0 and 5. If it's not the first one, I'm going to do that offset thing. And if it is the first one, I'm going to do the URL without the offset. And then I'm doing the request.get on each URI, making sure that the status is okay, and then adding the response to the results. That makes sense? Anyways, let's just run this function and see what happens. Here I'm running it for 80 reviews. Takes a while because it's pinging the URL, the URI 4 times. But here we see that we have 80 movies, 80 movie reviews. And that is a quick summary of how you would use an API. Any questions? Yeah, APIs are awesome. They're often, when you get to web scraping tomorrow or next week, web scraping can be a lot messier, but sometimes better because we're web scraping, you can get literally the exact piece of information you want that you see on a website. But APIs, because they have their JSON format where it's neatly nested in keys, it's, I think, cleaner data to deal with. So yeah, a lot of places have APIs. New York Times is a great one. They also have, like, I think a very commonly used one for students is like getting the food reviews, like the restaurant reviews API. That's a common one. Spotify has a really good API. Spotify's API is cool because you can like look up artists, look up specific songs, and for each song they have like a bunch of different parameters. Like, I don't know if anyone has explored, but they have all these interesting measures for songs, like how danceable is a song. They actually have like a measure for that. I don't know how they calculate it, but they have that number. They also have like how happy is a song. So Spotify's API is really cool, and I've seen a lot of cool projects come out of that. What other fun APIs? Pretty much anything you want. There's like a website called, I think, Rapid API. So you'll probably take a look at this when you're trying to find inspiration for your project in the future that you need to find your own data. But Rapid API, if it would load, lets you discover a bunch of APIs. So you can see like, all right, image APIs, text analysis APIs, with these pop-ups. But yeah, you'll basically see if you need data and you can't think of a project, or if you have a project idea, always a good idea to like start here, because I personally prefer working with APIs rather than web scraping. Ooh, they added a COVID section, which is cool. So yeah, APIs are pretty neat. Any other questions? All right, feel free to like ping me if you need anything. I know James is out today. My students don't ping me enough. But yeah, let me know if you're working on this material and if you have any questions, or any other material really. Feel free to send me a Slack. But yeah, so nice meeting all of you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Take care.
Bye.